Hello, and welcome to the Acmeware DR Network training series. My name is Ian Proffer, and today we'll be taking a look at Module 1 of our Fundamentals Learning track, entitled An Introduction to MEDITECH and Data Repository. In this topic, we'll cover the basics of reporting from MEDITECH using Data Repository, and specifically with Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio and other SQL-based tools. So with that, let's get started. So for the Sound of Music fans out there, and that includes me, we're going to start from the beginning and provide an overview of MEDITECH and Data Repository. Some of you watching and listening may be new to MEDITECH entirely, or maybe you are only familiar with specific applications in MEDITECH, so we'll cover things pretty broadly and talk at a very high level about the entire system, how it's structured, and how it stores data. Now this is important because as we look at Data Repository, particularly if you work with any other SQL-based systems, it helps to understand why the data are stored the way they are. That is, it's a fairly atypical relational database design. And we'll also talk a little bit about Microsoft SQL Server specifically, which is the database platform that every data repository uses. And finally, how we interact with that database platform using SQL Server Management Studio. Now, the way that MEDITECH, or the entire system, is organized, it's grouped into what MEDITECH calls applications, sometimes referred to as modules. Now, these applications are also often referred to by their shorthand mnemonic, as MEDITECH calls it. So, for example, as we look at the clinical group on this slide, we have ambulatory, which might be AMB, emergency department, which might be ED, imaging and therapeutic services, which MEDITECH's mnemonic would be ITS. You get the idea. So these are, broadly speaking, how MEDITECH categorizes in their 6.1 and Expanse platforms all the applications into loose categories: patient access, decision support, which includes data repository, IT, health information management, financials, and so on. Now, understanding what category an application belongs to is kind of important because over the many years that Acmeware and I have worked with Data Repository and MEDITECH, we've seen over thousands of reports we've produced for our clients that reports tend to fall into one of three pretty broad categories that we see described here, or at least include data from these three categories, even if they're combined. So patient demographics, obviously, is the first one that comes to mind. We're going to need to know the patient name, maybe the account number, maybe the unit number. What we call codified or abstracted data, which is anything that's captured in the system and then finalized after a patient encounter, which includes, for example, diagnosis codes or billing codes for insurance purposes. And then finally, clinical information, which we use very broadly to include anything that's captured, documented, imaged during a patient stay, whether by a nurse, whether by a physician, any other type of provider or technician that's actually part of the healthcare part of the visit, if you will. Let's take a look at each of these categories more closely. Patient demographics first, which comes from the key application, both registration or reg and health information management or HIM. And again, this is going to include the obvious things you'll think of: patient names, account numbers, addresses, phone numbers, insurance numbers, things like that. Anything that uniquely identifies the patient and belongs to that patient. Now, again, the two applications we work with most commonly for this type of information are Reg and HIM. The difference between those two applications is that registration tends to contain visit level information. So in other words, if a patient comes back more than once, we'll have two account numbers for two visits, two records and registration for that same individual. HIM, on the other hand, is truly patient-based. So anything that uniquely identifies that individual, say the medical record number, sometimes called the unit number, or even their name, would be tracked in the HIM application. Next categories of data we look at, again, we call codified or abstracted data. Now, abstracting refers to both the name of the application or module, ABS from MEDITECH, as well as many healthcare facilities actually refer to the process of abstracting the chart by that term as well. Now, this also can be referred to sometimes as happening in the medical records department or maybe the health information management department. But when we talk about abstracting, we're typically specifically talking about the codification that occurs in that department after a patient visit that doesn't apply directly to billing. So again, that would be things like diagnosis codes, procedure codes, anything that is gleaned from the documentation that is then categorized, codified into a set of codes, which can then be turned around and made part of their permanent chart or medical record. The same thing goes for billing or billing and accounts receivable, affectionately known by longtime Meditechers as BAR, for the purposes of producing a bill and charging the patient and their insurance company. So charge procedure codes, for example. So everything that happens during a patient stay, whether it's a procedure or whether it's actually some type of inventory, say a Q-tip used during treatment or a bandage to be simple. Also, anything that generates a charge will get codified into billing codes, again, so the patient can receive a bill and the hospital can collect their money. Now again, from both of these applications, abstracting and BAR, the root level of information is stored at the visit or encounter level. So think of an account number as being unique per visit, and those abstracting codes will be applicable to that same account number, as will all the billing codes. And then our broadest category is what we call clinical information. And this would be anything that is documented in the system by any type of healthcare provider, a nurse, a physician, a pharmacist, a radiology technician, you name it, someone working in the lab for a blood draw. And these are all categorized in these applications you can see here. It covers the bulk of what we work with in MEDITECH. The patient care system, or PCS, laboratory, which includes microbiology and pathology and blood bank as well, collectively referred to as lab, pharmacy, order management, surgical services, ITS, and finally emergency department for those hospitals that use it. And again, for all this type of activity, we're typically going to relate it back to the visit or encounter level. Again, tracked per account number, all this activity being documented in the system.